I guess I'll start off with confessing to you that I'm here with no prepared remarks. I'm just going to try and regale you with some stories from my career over the next 30 minutes or so, and hopefully you'll find something of value. I understand that you're from all over the business school, accounting, finance, marketing. So I'll disclose to you right up front that I am an entrepreneur. I don't consider myself an investor, certainly not a manager. And when it comes to entrepreneurship, I believe that, yes, the stereotypical entrepreneur who's an innovator starts and owns his own business, but I also believe anyone who perceives something different, sees an opportunity and exploits that opportunity, be it the exploitation of management, capital structures, marketing, that's all part of being an entrepreneur. Probably the best place to start is how I got started, my background. I live in Plano, Texas, a suburb of Dallas. My wife and I, real quick, we have 9 children, no twins, no adoptions. My wife still teases me that she stopped washing our underwear in the same load after the 9th child. But we do have 12 grandchildren. I grew up in a home where my father, you'd consider him a soldier of fortune. He was continually trying different ventures and failing at them, so we grew up very accustomed to utilities being turned off, cars being repossessed, home being repossessed. And he used to always tell me there is no security in this lifetime, only opportunity. But as I've gone throughout my career, he is at one side. The entrepreneurs that I have known avoid risk. They're very, very good at due diligence, at avoiding and handicapping risk. Something my father wasn't very good at. But by the time I was 12, he'd finally hit upon something that he had success with, and that was a real estate school franchise where real estate sales agents and brokers would go to get their classroom hours for licensing. From there, he opened a title agency, actually 3, and a construction company. So I grew up from the age of 12 working in those businesses, correcting tests, searching titles down at the courthouse. I did go to UVU and was a transfer student at BYU until my father came to me one day and asked if I could please come help out in the business full-time. This is the late 70s. Frankly, his construction company and title agencies were circling the drain. He'd had a manager in the title company that had embezzled just short of $2 million, and so they were robbing Peter to pay Paul. They were taking money out of the construction company to try and meet closings in the title company. So I did get to go to work full-time in that environment, and eventually presided over the dismantling of those 2 businesses as my father spent less and less time. In fact, towards the end, stopped coming in altogether. It was just, don't mean that as a negative. I say it because it's probably, without a doubt, the greatest, the best educational experience I ever had. You learn an awful lot watching businesses fail, what went wrong, what they should have done differently, dealing with bankers, trying to complete houses, and then working with them on foreclosures and so forth. So I learned an awful lot there. It came at a very high tuition for my father, but as things would turn out, the real estate school he sold and took the money and quite literally left with another woman, and I was left at that point without a job, without a degree, married with 2 children. The only thing I had was an idea. That idea involved buying apartment complexes in Texas, which we'll get to in a minute. But that also required capital, something I did not have either. Now, while I do not, in fact, I abhor debt. We have been a debt-free business for going on 27 years. I did start out with debt. Not proud of the way I did it. It's rather embarrassing, but I can tell you, because you couldn't do it today, not with the way credit agencies and their computer systems and inquiries. But at that time, we had a house that we had bought from the bank who had financed the construction company. And I took a second mortgage out on that home of $5,000. I kept $2,500 with the other money that I had to live on. I essentially had myself a 6-month fuse. The other $2,500 I deposited into a bank. If you're not familiar with what share loans are where you borrow against your savings. So I went right into the bank, told them I wanted to establish a history of credit. I deposited that money, and then I borrowed a share loan, $2,500 against it. And then went and did it again at another bank, and another bank, did 25 banks in total. Family jokes about it being my round robin. But at the end, after that 25th bank, I went back to the first bank with the $2,500 that I had just borrowed against a share loan. Paid that loan off and asked for a $5,000 loan, $2,500 secured by savings, $2,500 unsecured. Not all 25 banks did it. However, 20 banks did do it. So by the time I'd finished, I had $50,000 for 6 months. That's the capital I had. I bought a 12-unit apartment complex. It worked. I sold it, paid back the debt, now had some capital. I then bought a 14-unit complex, which worked, then a 36-unit complex, and then a 160-unit complex. All of those proving up the idea. And then from there, really expanded it, which we can get into. The idea was this. We're talking 1979. You kids, most of you weren't even born. Prime rate was 21%. They had the misery index, unemployment, inflation, and prime. All three were double digits, and they used to add it together to come up with the misery index. Back when Lyndon Johnson was president from Texas, he had a big push, a big initiative on low-income housing, put a lot of pressure on life companies. And they did build a lot of apartments, low-income apartments, in the late 60s, primarily by one developer, a fellow named Danny Rabinowitz. But because they were low income, the landlord paid all utilities, electric, gas, water. With rising utility costs and so forth, these life companies had foreclosed and taken literally all of those complexes back by the mid-70s. They maintained those complexes very well. There was obviously no new construction. Occupancies were very high. While in apartments you can never actually hit 100% because there is always some turnover, tenants moving out, new people signing leases, moving in on the first of the month. The best you can hope for is somewhere around a 97, 98% physical occupancy. Yet the life company was collecting in the mid-70s as far as rent, economical occupancy. So when you stop and think about that a minute, that means that 20-some-odd% of the tenants aren't paying, which means evictions, which means make-readies. Back then, a make-ready cost a little over $800 per unit, which added to the expense side. The life companies with no debt, they owned them, were losing $100 a unit a year. Not a big loss, but they were still losing $100, and they were getting no return on the money that they had put out to build those apartments. Interest rates were very high. I worked primarily, almost solely with three life companies: John Hancock, Metropolitan Life, and New York Life, and bought apartment complexes from them on these terms. We paid on average $5,200 a unit with 20% down. We would invest another $500 to do, which we'll talk about in a minute, modest changes, so that we were in them $5,700 a unit. Had the life company carry back or finance 80% of it. And that was really key, because in an environment when prime was 21%, we averaged 8%, 30-year fixed rate mortgages, all non-recourse. Non-recourse meaning they could only look to the property if we didn't make the payment. They couldn't come after me personally. Well, the idea behind it, this was an exploitation, if you will, of management. While they maintained those complexes very well, as soon as we would buy one, the first thing we attacked was the revenue side. These were low-income housing, blue-collar, but the people worked. They worked as nurses, janitors, you name it. They were paid every Friday. They were paid weekly, but they were charging rent monthly. None of them saved the money, or obviously 25% on a regular basis did not save up to pay the monthly rent, which included the utilities. So the first thing we did was take rent from being paid monthly to weekly. Rents back then were $300 a month. We charged $75 a week. If you think about that a minute, we also passed on in that a rent increase that went unnoticed to the tenants. When you collect monthly, you collect $48 a week. When you collect weekly, you collect $52 a week. So we were collecting an extra month that the life company wasn't before. Secondly, the vast majority of these people did not have bank accounts. Unlike Utah, back in those days, Republic Bank, which was right there, you couldn't open up a checking account without a credit rating, which most of them did not have. So when they'd get paid on Friday, they would go and cash their checks, pay a very high price to do that. That extra $500 a unit that I told you we would invest, this is part of where it would go. We installed little bulletproof glass cages inside the office where we cashed payroll checks for free. And every Friday is just what you would think. We would have tenants lined up to cash their checks for free, and we would just withhold their rent. So from an income standpoint, we went immediately from mid-70s to where our economic occupancy was equivalent to the physical occupancy, 97, 98%. Big boost on the revenue side, plus the rental increase. On the expense side, as I've always told my kids, if you can't manage pennies, you'll never be able to manage dollars. There was nothing that was too small. Starting at the big expenses, hot water heaters. If you had 8 of them in a building, instead of having all 8 of them run full blast, we replumbed them in series so that one hot water heater took it up to this, it spilled into the next, that took it up to this. So you didn't have 8 of them running full blast. The boiler, gas and air are 2 different densities. It was a little 99-cent part that we'd install just before it went into the boiler that would remix the air and the gas. That was a big savings. The buildings were now 12 to 14 years old. The insulation had fallen. We put radiant barrier in the attics to reflect heat out in the summer and down in the winter. Toilets, we siliconed a brick in the tank of every toilet. We started providing all lights. We didn't want tenants buying their lights. They were out there getting 400-watt light bulbs. Long story short, we cut expenses by 40% almost instantly. So at the end of the day, They went from losing $100 on average per unit before debt service per year to where we were making on average $1,610 per year after debt service to the life companies. To put some scope behind that, between the beginning of 1980 and October of '81, purchased 10,080 units from those three life companies. That was bought with roughly half of them with investors, the other half with a financial institution who partnered with me, where they got their money back first and then we split. Sold all those units in '83 and '84 to two different financial institutions. Sold them for an average of $16,300 a unit. So that idea, if you will, that idea was worth, at the end of the day, it made $134 million profit after giving back the investors their capital. Then their share of the profit was another 40-something. The idea to my company was worth $91 million. And from that, that brought home in spades to me that in the world of business, ideas are worth so much more than time. It doesn't matter how much you're paid by the hour. At the end of the day, there's only so many hours in a day, yet an idea has no ceiling on it. And hence, I've always told my kids they can work long or they can work smart. But I really focused on ideas after that. The next transaction, and I only hit a couple because I'm a deal junkie, I'll admit that to you. On average, we've done a little over 2 deals a year for the last 30-some years. But the next example will be the exploitation of capital. I don't know how many of you are familiar with mortgage companies, what they do or how they work. But it's what it says. You would go to a mortgage company, get a loan on your home. And then every month you make your monthly payment to that mortgage company, which includes principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Probably what you don't know is what the mortgage company is doing. What the mortgage company does is pool mortgages, groups mortgages together in pools. They'll get Fannie Mae back then, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Ginnie Mae, insurance, and then sell the mortgage-backed security so that they retain the servicing. So every month when you make a payment, that mortgage company takes that payment and it passes the principal and interest on to whoever holds or owns that mortgage-backed security, and it keeps in escrow the taxes and insurance throughout the year, so at the end of the year it can pay the taxes and insurance. For that, in those days, they were paid 0.3% of the loan balance per year to perform that function. But what is interesting is that tax and insurance escrow account is a lot of free money because a mortgage company cannot earn interest on those funds. In the summer of 1983, the company that I targeted, negotiated, and subsequently acquired was Troy Nichols Mortgage out of Monroe, Louisiana. At that time, and I know it's not a lot of money now, I mean, things have gotten way out of hand, or out of proportion, but at that time, Troy Nichols serviced $2.3 billion in mortgages. They were the 18th largest mortgage company in the country. But at the lowest point in the year, the lowest month in the year, they had $144 million in escrows. It would go up from there during the year and then drop down to that when they would pay it out, and they could not earn interest on it. However, by Fannie, Freddie, the investors who they serviced for, they were required to be insured. So the banks they would keep those funds with would buy treasuries or government-insured instruments. So here is a mortgage company with $144 million of free money, if you will, if you can figure out how to untap or to tap that at its lowest point, and off of its servicing fees, off its regular operations, Troy Nichols at that time was making $4.6 million a year. Not a lot of money relative to a $2.3 billion servicing portfolio. The idea behind that is, let's talk about a separate company. Savings and loans were struggling back then due to financial disintermediation. They had fixed rate loans on mortgages. They were having a run on the bank because money market accounts could now pay much higher interest rates than they could. At the end of the day, they're paying more out on their deposits than what they were earning on their loans. I looked at a very small savings and loan. It had 67 million in assets and 68.5 million in liabilities. Had a negative net worth of $1.5 million, and it was losing $100,000 a month. I went to the FSLIC, Federal Savings Loan Insurance Corporation, which no longer exists, but it's the same as the FDIC. It used to insure the deposits of savings and loans. And the deal I cut there was to buy that savings and loan for $1.5 million, fill the hole, and put another $4.5 million of capital in it. In return, which was the first time it happened, they gave me a letter stating that, let's say that $144 million in escrows, Fannie Mae alone had $68 million. Well, they would only insure the first $100,000. They gave me an opinion letter saying that no, as long as no individual loan or individual borrower's escrow account exceeded $100,000, it would be covered by their insurance. Well, obviously, nothing even came close. Most of these escrow accounts, a big one would have been $1,300. So with that letter, I had negotiated the purchase of Troy Nichols Mortgage for $64 million. The way that was accomplished is I acquired the savings and loan, raised the interest rate on our 90-day CDs. Back then they were called brokered CDs. It took about 10 days to bring in $64 million. The savings and loan wrote a check. Actually, it wired the money, $64 million to the shareholders of Troy Nichols, and the savings and loan now owned that mortgage company. And you can guess the very first thing we did was to take, at the time that we closed on it, there was actually $190 million in those escrow accounts. The first thing we did is the mortgage company opened a checking account at the savings and loan. All $190 million went into that checking account. So the savings and loan now had $190 million of free money, no interest on it whatsoever. Let the CDs roll out as they matured at 90 days. So now that savings and loan just did, granted, it was a minnow swallowing a whale. There's no question about that. But it picked up the earnings from that, from the servicing operation, which was $4.6 million a year, and it picked up a bunch of free deposits, which we used to invest in Ginnie Mae, Ginnie Mae's at that time, and they were yielding 12.5%. That savings and loan went from losing $100,000 a month to making $19.5 million in the year 1984. The bad news is it was the most profitable savings and loan in the country for its size. It made the front page of the Thrift News. So it did not take long for competitors to figure out how that was done. And up until that time, you could buy mortgage servicing rights based on the 3/8 servicing fee alone. After that time, people started attributing a value to the escrows. So the market quickly took that exploitation away. But from closed on Valentine's in '84, Valentine's Day. From 1984 until late '87, that idea Chase Bank bought that mortgage company for $335 million. So that idea was worth an awful lot of money, far more than you could ever make by the hour. In other words, business will reward creativity. I don't got a glare here. 10 minutes. I'll give some question and answers at the end. Got several examples I can go through, but maybe the thing I should do is just cut to what I'm doing right now, which is, well, we're always doing something. We never invest more than 10, never have invested more than 10, after the apartments, more than 10% of our capital in any one deal, no matter how good it looks. But the entrepreneurial endeavor that we're in is far more traditional, a better mousetrap, if you will. I'm sure you'll probably cringe at first, but it has to do with recreational vehicles, RVs. I don't know how many of you or your parents have ever owned a motor home, but I bought my first one in 1985, and while they're a lot of fun with the family, they are a real hassle to own. A real hassle through every facet of it. People go out, I look at our customers, you know, they spend $500,000 and up for these things. The first thing they have to do is find a place to park it, because no municipality where we live will allow you to park it on the street or in your driveway. So you see them parked out on chain-linked gravel lots. You see them under awnings. These are expensive toys that are just sitting outside, but from an owner's perspective, when it comes time to use it, they got to go out the day before and hook up a trickle charger to charge the dead battery so they can start it the next day. Then they've got to take it and fill the water tank, which, for your information, takes anywhere from 50 minutes to 100, or to an hour and 10 minutes, depending on the size of your tank. They have to air all their tires. That's usually about an hour 40, because you're talking tag axles, buses. It's dirty, it's dusty, the wives hate it. They finally get on the road, and when they come back, as is the case, because they just rumble down the road, there's always repairs, always. If you're going to own a motor home, very few people own them. You'd be crazy to own them without an extended service plan, which most people have. So the extended service plan pays for the repairs. It's just the hassle. When you get back, you have your list of repairs. You call the service shop, which is generally the dealer. You make an appointment. Your wife takes you to where you store it, follows you over, you drop it off. They diagnose it, get authorization from the extended service plan, order the parts, and tell you to come pick it up. Your wife takes you out there, you take it back. 3 weeks later, they call and say your parts are in, and the whole process starts over again. It is an incredible hassle. That's the user experience for owning a motorhome. Our concept, if you look, we'll get into the business model in a minute. From the user's experience, we just built our first prototype, wanted to see if we could prove it up, that the concept was commercially viable, kind of like buying the first 12 and 14 unit complexes. We just built the prototype. It opened in August of 2009. By November of 2010, we were 117.8% occupied. You can overbook in this business because you always have people on the road. But from the user experience, their coach is parked inside in a climate-controlled building, plugged into a 50-amp plug, so there's never any dead batteries. They literally call us, email us, or text us when they want to pick up. They come, they are told which staging area it's in. We check and air their tires. We fill their fill their water tank, check the water in their batteries. They have a key fob like a garage. They literally use their key fob, get in, and leave. When they return, it's the exact same process. They're met by our valet, who is also a technician. They tell them what needs to be repaired, what they want clean, what they want changed. They get in their car and they leave. We have a 10-bay service facility inside the shop. We get the authorization from the extended service plan. We repair it. From the owner's standpoint, all he knows is the next time he's ready to go, it's been done. He hasn't had to hassle with it at all. By way of numbers, our average motorhome owner spends a little over $24,000 a year with us. About $19,000 to $20,000 of that is paid by insurance or the extended service plan. The rest he pays out of his pocket for storage or any cleaning. In addition to that, the average ownership period of a motorhome is 4.3 years. We have an indoor sales room, so people are used to going out to a dealer that keeps a coach out on a lot, and it's hot and it's dusty. That's not the experience with us. It's indoors, it's plugged in, the air conditioners are running, lights on, it's a clean environment. You develop a relationship with these customers. We sell their coach for them, and we sell them their new coach. 68% of all coaches sold are used. The average sales price last year was $260,000. For used, the standard consignment fee is 10%. So on average, every 4.3 years, we will collect $26,000 from them on the sale of their coach and something more than that on the purchase of their new coach. That is a lumpy business, but it gets to the business model. The business model is this. When it comes to storage, it's very mom and pop. It's very fragmented. When it comes to service and sales, it's dealerships. Dealerships, when it comes to a franchise, to get a franchise for a dealership, you have to commit to a minimum amount of inventory. The dealer closest to us, I can give you comfortable giving the name because he went broke this past year and died, was Buddy Gregg. He had $34 million in inventory. That's just before you even get to his property or building. Making 10% on a coach, paying a 20% commission. That left him with the rest to cover interest on what he floored, to pay for advertising, to pay the help. The list goes on and on. Well, once the tenants came with us, once they were on our pad in that building, it was captive business. They didn't take their coach back to Buddy Gregg to get service because it's just too easy to tell us what's wrong when they drop it off and we fix it. So it took a big cut out of his service. He once had 18 techs, he now has 3. He's dead. General Electric Credit Corp foreclosed on everything and sold it to another man, but the service shop's down to just 3. When it comes to sales, naturally we took the lion's share of used sales. And when it comes to new sales, while we didn't have a new franchise, we have just struck a deal with a major high-end manufacturer. Hope to do it again and again because it's totally revamping the way it's done, where we don't have a minimum inventory. Think of the Dell model. Our customers can just order, deliver it. Our capital is invested in the building, not in the inventory, and it's much more captive. To give you an idea, I don't know if they can bring up a picture or a quick video of this, but the building itself is just a little larger than 3 football fields, including the end zones. And if you click on that watch, maybe you can click one of the 30-second videos to get a feel for it. From an investment standpoint, I'll finish that up real quick. We're looking at a 30% cash-on-cash return each year with no leverage, no debt. If you business students take a look at the public storage market, you'll see that in the form of REITs, that they trade for between 4 and 6% of dividend yield. We've just finished redesigning the building with Beck Construction of what the next, because we've learned an awful lot in design. We think we can bring the cost of the next building down by almost 30% without messing with the user experience or the customer experience. After that building is built, as soon as we can prove that we can replicate it, then we will start to build out 3 or 4 a year.
Do you ever wish that you were working in something else?
Do I?
Do you wish you were doing something else with the careers that you had, the jobs that you set out to accomplish? Do you wish you would have done something else?
I can honestly tell you I do not. I love what I do. I can't wait. For 30-some years, I can't wait to get to the office. The wife has to call to remind me to come home. I love what I do. I've told all of my children if they can find something that they love to do, they'll never work another day in their life. I don't feel like I work. I love what I do.
Across all your different ventures, how many employees do you have?
Well, it varies depending on what kind of businesses we're in. I mean, the mortgage company at the end had close to 3,000 employees. I think the question you're maybe getting to, and it took me a while to realize it and get to it, as far as I used to office at one of the businesses, and that all the time, that was a disaster. Managers wouldn't manage. They were always coming to me with questions, taking up my time. But since 1995, I have a partner, CPA. He used to be our auditor back in the early 80s with Arthur Anderson before they were no longer around, but he's been with me 27 years. He owns 11% of the firm. He and I and administrative assistant since 95 have officed in an office. That's it. All the employees, managers, they office out at their businesses. Our time is free. You're not asking it, but I'm a voracious reader, but I don't read very many books. I mean, if I read 3 books a year, that would be a lot. To me, reading books is looking in the rearview mirror. It's something somebody else did. The marketplace has already figured it out. I don't draw a lot of any inspiration from what someone else did. What I've always been passionate about, which goes back to the early 80s, going to the public library and checking them out, till by the early 90s you could get them online. It's a wonderful environment now. I read lots and lots of 10Ks, 10Qs, and annual reports. If I said it, for me, I'm passionate about business. When you read those things, there's a lot of really, really bright people out there in this country, a lot of people with really neat products or services. And the more you read, the more things start to come together for you down the road. In other words, the ability to come up with an idea, to come up with something creative that you can capitalize on. Any creative idea you find in a book, in my opinion, has already been done. Everybody's known about it, and you can't do it again. You got to come up with the next idea. And for me, I get it by reading those because I love to read about businesses. Just a quick example, back in the REITs, there was a REIT, Southmark, bought apartments, office built, real estate galore in the 80s, and they bought it with junk bonds from Drexel Burnham. Well, the tax laws changed in 1986. The value of real estate plummeted, and this is just an example. Here's Southmark. They own all this real estate. They're suffering from lower occupancies. They're struggling and, in fact, not making debt payments on a lot of the bonds. They can't sell their real estate because if they sold it, they would recognize a huge loss that would put them in violation of their debt covenants. They don't have enough money to make debt service, let alone pay the bonds. that wasn't something somebody came to me on. I had been reading. Well, their bonds were trading for between 18 cents and 24 cents in the public marketplace. It was a no-brainer to go buy blocks of their bonds, to go buy $50 million worth of bonds for $10 million, and then go to Southmark and say, hey, we can buy $50 million of your real estate at your book value. You don't have to book any loss. It retires $50 million of your debt, and if it works, we'll do it again and again with you. So that they were able to start reduce, couldn't go fast enough, they still went belly up, but from our perspective, granted, we were buying real estate that was really only worth 60 cents on the dollar to Southmark, but we only paid 20 cents for it anyway, because that's all we paid for the bond. Whether it's buying up the bonds of a municipality and taking it through bankruptcy, the list goes on, and the ideas come from reading 10Qs, 10Ks, annual reports. So no, I love what I do. My partner and I sit in that office. We read, we bounce stuff, brainstorm, up in the back.
Seems like the big thing is having big ideas. So for us being young, we have an idea, and it sounds like we're also getting out of it. You said first thing would be capital. What would be the next step, or what would you suggest if you have an idea?
My suggestion would be it doesn't cost anyone in here a dime, if you're passionate about business, to start reading about businesses. You can go online to the SEC and read all the annual reports you'd like for free. When you come up with an idea, the capital will always follow. That wasn't the case when I started, but I'm more convinced now than ever that if you have a good idea, it is not a problem to attract capital. And if you have a problem attracting capital, it's a very strong indication your idea isn't that good. Okay. Yes?
You do venture capital? Pay out to other people's ideas?
We've done one deal. It went very well. There's actually, of all places, a company in Salt Lake called 3Form. But no, we typically do not. Yes?
I'm going to go along with the question over there about ideas. What is it that inspires your ideas that you had, the $100 million plus ideas?
Again, I have to go back to just reading. Obviously, with experience, you know, every deal that's done, I think back, oh, we could have made more money had I known. That's just another arrow in the quiver that I could use down the road the next time. But reading about businesses, understanding, no matter what environment, I don't want to get pigeonholed as a real estate guy either. We've made more money out of real estate than we have in real estate. You just start to see things, whether it, in 97, 98, when subprime auto loans tanked, the government was out there. You could buy subprime auto loans for 2 or 3 cents on the dollar all over the place. Well, knew of a company, Credit Acceptance Corporation, who specialized in subprime auto lending and collections. Very good. They couldn't borrow money or access capital to make loans at that time because it had tanked. Well, it was a no-brainer. If you can buy something for 2 or 3 cents on the dollar, transfer it to CAC to collect and split, you know, stuff just starts coming together. The more businesses that you know about and you know what they do, when something happens, the more likely you are to see how those pieces can fit together.